Better Buildings for Humans is powered by Advanced Glazings, makers of the Solera line of products. Solera is the leading glass glazing made specifically for architectural daylighting and with extreme insulation performance. Learn more at advancedglazings.com. Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Better Buildings for Humans. I'm your host, Joe Menchefski, and this is the podcast where we look at the impact that the built environment has on our health, our wellness, our productivity, our general joy of being alive. And of course, we have to look at sustainability as well. I've got a great guest today. I've got Jim Baldwin from Domatic. Am I pronouncing it right? Domatic?
That's correct.
Okay, perfect. I should say before we introduce Jim that it's absolutely hotter than is possible in my studio today. I'm going to try not to have a heart attack and die in the middle of the conversation. So, dial 911 if you hear anything bad happen before the end of the conversation. Jim, welcome to the show. It's absolutely wonderful to have you here.
Great to be here.
Let's talk about you first, you personally. Tell us about your background and tell us about the path that led you to create Domatic. And please make sure you help us understand what you thought was wrong with the existing building automation systems that needed to be fixed.
Sure. So I think this goes all the way back to my time at Apple, where I started my career. I worked on a technology there called FireWire. And that was kind of a contemporary of USB being built about the same time. I like to think that the two things end up merging into one. But what we were out to do was to simplify the way we connected computers together. At the time, you had to have, practically had to have an IT guy come to your office to plug a hard drive in and set all the dip switches and install the drivers and IRQ configurations and stuff like that. It was kind of crazy. And we said, well, why can't this be plug and play? It was kind of early in this concept of plug and play. So, nowadays with what happened, in the wake of all that effort was that you can plug a hard drive or your camera into your computer without thinking twice about it. It just works. It doesn't require IT skills. So when we looked at the built world, we realized that the buildings are still stuck in that pre-USB era where, any kind of technology you put in a building really requires high technical skills to understand it in order to design it, install it, and even maintain it over time. So a lot of projects are going low tech. The stat is about 1 out of 10 projects end up following through. So it really comes down to if you have a somewhat unlimited budget, you can go ahead and put technology into building, but most people just back off and say, yeah, I can't afford it. So what we discovered was that the electrical code has always had this opportunity in it that is called Class 2 power. It's been in there since the inception of the code, and it really governs things like, networking cable and phone lines and things like that. But basically, if you stay under a certain wattage, 100 watts, and under a certain voltage, which is 60 volts, they basically give you a pass. 900 and some pages of the electrical code don't apply to what you do when you adhere to this concept of Class 2 power. The industry calls it low voltage, which isn't really an accurate term, but at least they understand what it is. So everybody appreciates that this low voltage thing is coming. But we realized that this was not just a chance to change the voltage, but it was an opportunity to exploit this for creating what I would call a USB for buildings, a better way to wire the technology up so you don't have to have the kind of IT technical skills necessary to manage building technology.
Let me dive a little bit on that, Jim. So how is what you're describing a low voltage network system different than a local area network, like a LAN system?
Okay, so yeah, a LAN is a low voltage network, so to speak. But what we realized about other approaches people have been taking to take advantage of low voltage, for example, using power over Ethernet, PoE, still requires significant IT skills. Still, you've got to program the systems. You've got to have a specialist that knows how to terminate a Cat5 cable. And, I can do it. I get it right 2 out of 3 times. But it's just not for everybody. And the typical build team just doesn't have the skills to be able to wire up a building using LAN technology to carry power and data. It's just not feasible.
I love it. Okay, let's keep going. I want to ask about unifying power and data. First of all, why does it matter to unify power and data in a building?
The way we see it, unifying power and data simply knocks down the barriers to adopting smart technology in a building so we can get access to the massive amount of data that is available in a typical building that we just sort of leave on the floor. The motivations to do that are, one big motivation is energy savings. If we can get the data and we're connected and we can control HVAC and talk to power meters, data we can collect can be combined with environmental data to, if we feed that into a neural net, we can create a perfect thermal model of how a building is operating. So we can turn a building into a thermal battery and do things like be smart about how we use energy in off-peak times to, say, pre-cool an environment so that we can use less energy during peak times. There's a lot of capability that comes from having that data that today is simply dropped on the floor.
And will that be helpful improving health and comfort of the occupants?
Yeah, absolutely. And not just health and comfort, but actually saves them money at the same time. The kind of stuff that we do pays for itself just in energy savings alone. But yeah, sure, you want high comfort. You really, if you want something, you need to measure it. So when you can put the kind of technology for sensing and control in the building that we're capable of providing, you can improve air quality, improve comfort, and then overall you can make the whole building more efficient to operate because that data helps the people who manage the building know when there's something wrong that needs to be addressed.
Forget the old paradigm that privacy means darkness. With Solera translucent glazings, architects can design spaces that are private, filled with natural light, and visually stunning. It's time to rethink how buildings work and feel. Learn more at advancedglazings.com.
Fantastic. Now, I have to roll back just a little bit. You mentioned neural nets, tying all of the data for energy management into a neural net. For those of us who don't have an IT background, can you explain what a neural net is and how it ties in?
Sure. I mean, neural net's sort of the basis for everything people are talking about with AI today. Many years ago, I mean, neural nets have been around since the 1960s, but I won't go through the whole history of machine learning, but over time we learned that if you have enough data, you can train a mathematical model to be able to on that data so that if you feed in new information, you can make predictions about what the future is going to look like based on that information. That's really the basis of all AI today. Literally, LLMs are simply predicting what the next word's going to be out of the system based on what your inputs are and what past words have been. So it's a fascinating technology. If you have data, really that's what we learned in the past several years with AI is that if you have enough data, you can train a neural net to make predictions for you to do very interesting things. In our case, we're using the history of weather patterns and humidity and temperature, as well as how the building responds to heating and cooling it. So we can literally, that neural net that we can train on that building can predict how many kilowatts it's going to take or kilowatt hours it's going to take to heat or cool that building by 1 degree over a certain unit of time. So when we know when that peak energy consumption time is coming, we can use the energy during off-peak to condition the building so that we use less energy during peak.
And the building maintenance supervisor does not need to understand the neural net in order to take advantage of those technologies.
No, this just shows up in the algorithm that runs on the software that runs on our system, and they simply can collect the savings.
Yeah, fantastic. I love it.
It's worth noting that there's a study done recently that showed tenants are actually willing to pay a higher rent for a building that has, from their point of view, they believe they're going to save money on energy. So if they believe that they will save money on energy, they will typically accept a higher rent, almost to the degree that it matches what that energy savings expectation would be. I don't know if you want to get into this, but there's a great study about this idea of putting out an energy score for an apartment that, a tenant that sees that apartment has a high energy score in a listing will pursue that apartment more often and accept a higher rent in exchange for that. And I think that the idea is I think it's because they perceive that apartment's going to be a better environment because people care about energy. It must be a better place to live.
Right on. Yeah, well, I mean, we see that with all the certifications, with well certifications, with Green Globes
Yeah.
certifications. It's just you're getting, a more quantitative analysis
Yeah,
with a, right.
exactly. It is.
Yeah,
People have talked in qualitative terms for a long time about all the goodness of making a better building, but this study really brought home that there is money to be made in improving the quality of life for tenants.
yeah. Oh, absolutely. Let's talk about regenerative design. I have a hard time with that one. Hot topic these days. And it seems to me that Domatic systems will align really well with regenerative architecture. Am I right with that assumption?
Yeah, well, I think everybody will benefit from regenerative architecture, to be clear.
Right.
It will touch every part of our lives in ways that we've yet to fully imagine. In particular, where we think it affects our customers now, a good example is one of the things we do in our system is if you're in a hotel or even an apartment, you can have a wall-mounted touchscreen now that has an experience that you use to provide an interaction with your occupants. So if it's a hotel, the hotel guests can see their name on a screen and control the temperature and open the blinds and things like that. If it's an apartment, maybe there are other use cases like opening the front door for a guest or something like that. But all that comes to bear in a wall-mounted touchscreen with some kind of interactive experience. Well, today, those apps on those screens are written by people who have product managers who think about the features that those apps have to have. And if you buy that app, you kind of get in a train of subscribing to the innovation that another company brings to you. But it's really hard for you to get your own experience on it. I think with regenerative design, our customers can literally, vibe code that experience that they want to put on those touchscreens instead of just putting up with whatever we or say a third party application developer would put together for them. They can literally create their own experiences for this. And we've actually been experimenting with that. We've been using Claude to create web interfaces that can be presented on these touchscreens in a way that allows our customers to simply say, yeah, this is what I want my experience to be, and then get it. And that's really one area where I think that's going to be interesting. You no longer have to abide by whatever innovation an individual company is producing for you. And in the construction space, there just isn't enough scale for any one particular provider of these applications to be able to put a lot of energy into it. So it doesn't make an economic sense for somebody to really be in the business of providing a great experience for one of those screens, but it makes a ton of sense for a property manager or building operator to be able to simply vibe code that experience for their tenants.
Oh, I love that. Now let's talk about like a regeneration of the building itself. Like, let's say we've got or I'll call it a repurposing. So we've got let me think of a real-time example. An office building that is now being repurposed to be full of apartments, full of residences. I got to believe that having, such a flexible system, wiring through the building would actually make that transition easier. Is that a good assumption?
Absolutely. The reconfigurability of a building using a system like ours is trivial. You don't have to think of it as a massive renovation. It's almost like we really are creating something that we think of as USB for buildings. And if the building really was built out of USB devices, anybody could come in and plug different USB devices into the ports. Of course, we don't really use USB per se, but we've created something that has that simplicity. There's no danger to it. It's low voltage. You don't have to have an entire electrical team come in to do all the work. Anybody can do it. Your building maintenance team can even do reconfiguration, which makes things a lot simpler.
All right. So electricians, how does their role change? Normally if you were doing a big transition from one type of building to another building, there'd be electricians in there yoinking out wires and trying to run, with fish tape to put new wires in. How does this affect their role?
Yeah, the beauty of our system is that we've made it so that the scope of the work an electrician can do goes beyond simply pulling the wires. In a way, we're turning electricians into smart building installers because we're not asking electricians to go learn skills like programming routers and switches and terminating Cat5 cables. So in a lot of ways, we're increasing the scope of the electrician. In fact, we are working with the local chapter of the IBEW here in San Mateo to install systems at their training facility so they can start to show their trainees what it means to install smart building technology. And, the dirty secret is it's not any different. It's just pulling wires and plugging things in, and because things are plug and play, you don't have to suddenly get a PhD in programming routers to be a smart building tech.
So what about the platform? Do you see that platform becoming unified, Jim? It's not USB. It's something new. Do you expect, will the world adopt to your platform, or will there be some sort of, convention at some point to nail down a common platform?
Absolutely. Having worked on FireWire in my early days, I know the importance of creating open standards. And it's always been our mission at Domatic to everything we're creating is envisioning a world where many players can build devices or applications or services or components and consume the system without having, barriers to adoption. And, openness has to be the core to our mission, or it'll never happen.
Right. Oh, absolutely. Jim, you've worked with some giants in consumer tech, right? You mentioned Apple, and I know there are others. What lessons from consumer product design do you think are most relevant to creating better building systems?
The one thing I can tell you about my experience from my time at Apple is there was one thing that we just burned into our brains. It was our job to bend technology to people and not expect people to bend themselves to our technology. That was the whole premise of Apple, is making technology approachable. And that's something that we have infused into our culture here at Domatic from day one. The whole point of what we're doing is to make everything we're doing more approachable. There are a lot of ways to build smart building technology, but no one is out there building something that has the approachability of what we're trying to create. I think that's really the nuance of what's missing from the world today.
Yeah, that's a really cool answer. What do they say? Meet them where they are? Yeah, I love that. I want to rewind to energy a little bit. For those who listen to the show often, there's a lot of the tension between prioritizing energy exclusively and sometimes prioritizing it over occupant health and comfort. So, I see where your system can be used very clearly to optimize energy usage, and it's brilliant. What other metrics should we be looking at that your system will be able to help us manage when we talk about, health and wellness for the occupants? What are the metrics beyond energy?
Right. So there are some interesting opportunities beyond energy savings that apply to sustainability. One of them is just copper itself is a precious resource. And, our system is able to eliminate about 90% of the copper that would be otherwise required. So there are some worthy goals just from a materials perspective. But if you can, as I mentioned before, I've always said, if you want something, you need to measure it. So knowing how people use the building is something that just is not available to somebody who designs a building today. You have no idea, what the traffic is or what, how a building gets used, other than people telling you anecdotally later on, how the building is performing for them. So, we can give real-time feedback about how the building is being used. And if you want better air quality, put air quality sensors in. You can actually monitor the air quality within a building to determine if the efforts you're putting in to improve the building are actually bearing fruit. Data is gold in this world, and to date, it's been way too hard to get the data out of a building to achieve these benefits.
Yeah, right on. I'm going to go off script a little bit here too. Again, if you had an entire community wired similarly, can those benefits, can there be an optimization at a broader scale, a neighborhood scale, a community scale, assuming that there's any sort of privacy issues or autonomy issues are dealt with? It's just a crazy thought. I wanted to.
Yeah, and think about this. So community scale meaning
everybody's wired together. Everybody's using, everybody's data is feeding into some sort of database so that you can optimize the, generation of electricity. You can optimize
There's one area where that could apply. The demand energy response is a hot topic, especially here in California, where we periodically have peak energy usage issues, and the power companies they're always looking for opportunities to knock down that peak. If you generate power, your biggest problem is that on those peak days, you don't have enough energy. You don't want to fire up a peaker plant or something like that. It gets more and more expensive to supply power when things are peaking out. So they're always looking for ways to get people to knock down their consumption on those days. So there are these mechanisms in place. I don't think they're that well implemented yet, but where you can get incentives for lowering the overall use of power. Now, it's impossible for an individual apartment tenant to make a dent in what the power company's demand is at this point in time, but a whole community can. So if everybody is opting into a system where collectively they're going to make adjustments to their energy consumption, they can all save money because they get the benefit of that incentive from the power company. So if we all allow our thermostat to be adjusted by 0.1 degree on a hot day, that could knock off the peak by itself, and we'd all hardly notice that small adjustment. So yeah, there are benefits that can come from the sort of the collective hive mind of data and collaboration between people in the community.
Yeah, brilliant idea. I wonder if you'd run into some social situations, individual freedoms and autonomy control. People worry about somebody reaching in to lower their energy consumption or their temperature setting by, 0.5% or something like that. It'd be an interesting social experiment, but scientifically, it'd be brilliant.
Being done.
Oh, is it? Okay.
Yeah, it is being done. It's being done poorly, I should say. Famously in Texas a couple of years ago when they had the freeze out,
right.
There were customers who had, agreements with the power company to adjust their thermostat in those days, and they weren't very happy because the system was very crude. And they realized that they had signed up to allow the power company to lower the thermostat for them in those days, and they weren't very happy about it. But if you've got enough people participating, that the impact in an individual is not going to be noticeable. It adds up over the course of a large population.
Do you want to bring lots of healthy, beautiful natural light in your building and still meet energy codes? Try Solera from Advanced Glazings. Learn more at advancedglazings.com.
Gotcha. I love that. All right, let's talk about some broader trends. How do you see Domatic fitting into the broader push towards electrification, net zero construction, and grid interactive buildings in general? Pick one, pick two.
Okay. Yeah, in general, we're a great fit because, we are a DC power system. We didn't choose to be a DC power system because of any particular motivation other than it makes no sense to do it any other way than what we're doing today. The power we distribute to the fixtures in the building from our hub comes from some higher power source, right? We are a class 2 power system downstream of our hub, but upstream we're getting our power from a class 1 power system. That does not need to be DC or AC. We basically have partitioned it so we can accept power from any source to be able to adapt it and work with our system. So in those buildings where we had a DC power source, we simply had a DC-DC converter give us the appropriate voltage so we could distribute it to our devices. So beyond just getting the power delivered to the fixtures in the building, being aware of where that power is coming from is a powerful concept. So if you've got a building that has DC power distribution and a battery backup and solar on the roof, well, there are different reasons why you might make choices about how you're using energy based on how much power is in that battery bank and how much power you're getting from the sun today. So it doesn't have to be a brain dead system that simply, turns the lights on and turns them off, but it can actually be adaptive to what the conditions are in the building. So you can go in more of a conservation mode when you're getting to the point where that battery is low and you haven't gotten a lot of power from the sun today, but on days when you're flush with power, allow a more generous use of power. Those kind of profiles can be very easily created in software with a system like ours, rather than having every different component of the system have to somehow be aware of what's going on. We actually have a central place where that algorithm can run to say, hey, we're going to go into a low power mode now because, it's better than waiting until we're out of power and having to shut the lights off.
Right. Okay. Yeah. It sort of distributes some responsibility, right? Not actual active responsibility, but it sort of distributes responsibility in a passive kind of way. Is that a reasonable way to describe that?
Well, it just makes the whole system holistic, right? If you've got, if you're receiving solar power from the sun, you've got a battery that you can charge when you don't need all of it. That's great, but wouldn't it be also great if you could kind of have line of sight towards, how much more energy you think you're going to get from the sun today to make decisions about, how much power you should be consuming today. Just like we're able to create that thermal battery for the apartment based on how the heating and cooling performs, we can actually make predictions about how much energy you're going to have in that battery later so that you can make better use of it and try to, the name of the game is spending less time pulling power from the grid and more time, pulling power from your locally generated sources.
Love it. Yeah, I love that. All right, let's talk about codes a little bit. Let's talk about building codes. If you could redesign building codes or permitting processes to accelerate the adoption of healthier, smarter buildings, what would you change? What in the codes would you change first?
Well, the beauty of our system is we don't have to change anything.
Yeah.
The codes that we benefit from, this class 2 power, has been in the book since the inception of the codes. So we're definitely, that's what's great about our system. I'm not a big fan of starting a company to fight City Hall. So That would be very difficult.
So you're there for adoption. Right now, today, you're there for adoption. There's nothing standing in the way of your product being adopted. People don't have to go way out on a limb to bring Domatic to their building.
Yeah. There's a point I was going to make about building codes around how much power is needed for lighting, and building codes require certain power profiles, like you have to have this many watts assigned to your lighting system based on the square footage. I think it would just dilute this overall conversation too much to bring that up. So maybe I'll just drop it at that. We don't really need to change building codes.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, that's fine. So Jim, there's a question that I ask every guest. It's the same question. And what I say is answer it from whatever perspective you would like. And that question is really simple. What makes a great building?
Well, in my opinion, a great building it's efficient, it's easy to operate, it enables modern features and improves the conditions of the people that spend so much of their time in it. And to that end, I think there's a lot of innovations out there that simply don't have a good vehicle to get into a building. If every feature someone wants to come up with to make a better experience for the building requires somebody to build an entire stack of technology to get it connected and installed and managed, and it ends up being a silo compared to other systems, then the friction is just too high and it just won't get adoption. We need that vehicle that is kind of that USB for buildings, if you will, in order for all these great companies out there that want to create better sensors to be able to get into the building without having to stand up so much capability that simply isn't germane to what they're trying to accomplish.
I love it. All right, Jim, before we go, do you have any exciting announcements, news you'd like to share, or anything interesting that you'd like to promote?
Well, there's a lot going on for us. This is a big year. We've been busy making updates to our product capabilities, increasing the scope of what our system can do. A lot of the work we've been doing with energy consumption and thermal modeling is really exciting. And I think we're going to see a real push towards the use of our system as the basis for improving energy efficiency. And so we're always looking for customers that want to collaborate with us and find new ways to improve their environment. And I think one of the things I like to think of who we are is that technology partner that can work with an innovative builder that really wants to create a better experience. If there's something you've got an idea about, we should talk about how we can help make it happen in a way that, is realistic and feasible. I want to say that again. That sounded stupid. So I say, if you're an innovative builder that really wants to, improve the quality of life in the buildings you're creating, then you can think of us as a technology partner who can help you get there.
How do people get a hold of you? What's the website, the URL? Give me an email or something so that to make sure that.
Sure. We're Domatic.io, and you can email me at jim@domatic.io anytime. I'm happy to chat and talk about what's possible here.
So it's Domatic, DOMATIC.io, and you can find Jim there, Jim@domatic.io. Jim, thank you very much. This was a really interesting conversation. There's some big changes coming, and I love being able to speak to the people who are at the leading edge of those changes. Thank you.
Thanks. I had a ton of fun.
All right. You take care.
You too.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Better Buildings for Humans. For more information on the world's best light diffusing and highly insulating glass glazing, please visit advancedglazings.com.